the Bike Shed podcast where we talk about all things software engineering, talk a lot about frameworks, and then argue over tabs versus spaces. I'm your co host, arguing that code quality still matters when everything I write is either Claude code or autocomplete. Scott K. And alongside me, a man who just reviewed Asian code and is asking, what is this doing? Matt Hamlin. And my other co host, a man who will ship fast, ship loud, and then make you uncomfortable about being right about it later. Dylan, spicy take curry. What is our topic for today?
Today we're talking about automated testing, I think, possibly. Scott, you had thrown out this topic, and I had jotted down some rough thoughts. But yeah, I don't know. Where do we want to take automated testing? What do we want to talk about with respect to automated testing? I feel like there's 5 whole epics worth of content here to be discussed.
So lately, I've been doing a lot of automated testing. So I'd like us to kind of talk about our general experience and feelings and thoughts on testing. Maybe talk about automated tests versus smoke tests, the trade-offs and the value of both, the effort involved in writing automated testing. I'd like us to conclude if they're worth it, and if anyone has any tips and tricks along the way, I think that would be great. Does anyone want to start, or should I start with basically my most recent experience?
Well, I guess one quick thing before we dig in, for the uninformed audience, automated tests are like, it's code that we write that verifies the code for the actual use case, right? So we build a website or build a service or something, and then we write some additional code that lives next to it that tests that service, to varying degrees or to varying implementation sort of states, I guess. I don't know. Right. We often talk about unit tests, which is just take a small piece of the code that we wrote and just test that small independent unit. And we also talk about end-to-end tests and integration tests. And end-to-end tests is sort of, in my mind at least, it's spin up the service and then sort of emulate what an actual user would do against that service, and then make sure the result is what you expect. So for a website, it's spin up the website, have the user visit the website, or have a test user visit the website and sort of click around the website and take action and whatnot. But anyway, yeah, Scott, maybe it sounds like you have some maybe a recent example in mind of that made you start thinking about testing a little bit more.
Probably talking more specifically about end-to-end testing and maybe some integration testing when I think of automated testing. When I think of automated testing, I'm thinking of tests that are running on a schedule or with CI, maybe with a pipeline. Might be a few different various ways your company might do it, or other places might do it, but they're just tests that are run consistently to make sure user behavior is the way it's expected for your application. So I guess recently I've been writing a lot of automated tests. Just give a little bit of background. I know we've done automated tests together at our time working together. I've done some automated tests working with Matt at small companies. And now I'm at a bigger company working on automated testing. And basically, it always feels like it takes 3 to 4 times the regular amount of work just to get started on an automated test. So recently, we're using Playwright. I know I've used some Playwright in the past, and I've used Cypress and I think Selenium really early. I think Dylan may have even been integrating that work really early or active in doing it. He doesn't look like he remembers at all, but I feel like it was related to something he did. Anyway, um, Playwright has definitely made it easier than these other patterns. And I know that when Matt and I worked together, we did do some short tests. But what I found is so difficult about automated tests, it's usually, it is very much based on the product you're testing. But the product I am working on has lots and lots of third-party permissions, and it interacts with multiple different applications. And users may not have permissions to interact with both applications. So it's been a good lesson on understanding how this application works with other applications and the overall structure. But I realized that there is a high cost in getting started with automated testing at scale, especially with applications that have lots of very specific paths. So basically, this is like the reason why I wanted to talk about this in general. And so my experience has been that I've done this in smaller environments where there were permissions, but that was a lot simpler to work with, like just basically login flows. Often automated end-to-end tests do test login flows because obviously if you are selling a product, you cannot sell anything if people can't log in, right? So often that is like the main or first test you'll see. But for this, we are trying to do like very, very rigorous end-to-end testing where we just make sure that different types of permission users can follow different flows, which has been a really intricate test. So even though Playwright has been an easier access to entry point, um, I've noticed we have a lot of very specific paths forward on how we write tests. That has made it a little bit harder. And I'm happy to start talking about some of that stuff, but I want to give you folks some time to react to some of the things I've started with, or maybe just talk about your general experience with end-to-end testing, automated testing in general, or Playwright, Cypress, and others.
Basically, top of mind right now is just like we use automated testing where I work, but um, I think the thing we notice the most is that things can be quite flaky from time to time. I don't know. Maybe that's something we can talk about how the companies you work at deal with those things. But yeah, it tends to block our CI pipeline, slow down developers, and then also trigger pages in the middle of the night because we use automated testing that like triggers monitors through Datadog with something called Datadog synthetic tests, which use real browsers. So we could talk more about that too. But yeah, there's like the concept of people running A/B tests and experiments, which can really mess with automated tests. So we could dig into that too. I feel like there's a lot there, and we found ways to solve for that recently, which is kind of cool, using like cookie overrides. So I'm just like going off the cuff on what I didn't. I'm not really bouncing off of what you said so much. You did mention some things around like high cost, and I was curious, like, is that high monetary cost, or it just takes a lot of time to set everything up? But yeah, I'm just kind
Yeah,
of
that
vibing.
that's a no, that's those are all really good points. And Matt was right. We need more time to cover all these things. But I think this is a good scratch the surface episode for the first time talking about testing. But to some of your points, I was mostly talking about cost getting set up, but you're right about the cost of like flakiness. Um, I think you said you folks run it via CI pipeline. I don't know. We do something very like different than I'm used to, which I'm happy to talk about. And it sounds like you said it slows down developers because of that. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think because we work in a monorepo, and maybe we don't spend enough time in developer experience, and that's just a pain point of working at a startup that doesn't have a dedicated team for developer experience.
Yeah, so we write our own tests. However, we have like teams dedicated to like ownership of monitoring. I learned something really interesting recently that so our automated tests run, so our smoke tests run every 15 minutes. Our automated tests run with every deploy manually. Uh, and basically, someone reviews those errors and decides whether or not to deploy that day, which I found to be very interesting based on those errors. So there are a lot of flakes. I have noticed as I've been doing this, when people go to deploy, they might rerun those tests a few times to see if it's something flaky. But they usually, we have our own dedicated Slack channels where people are actively monitoring the quality of the tests, and they try to call them out, and we try to make exerted or make decisions on tests that continuously have problems like right away. Do we skip it, for now, if it's flaky, do we find out what's flaky? Do we need it? Kind of things. So it seems like it's actively monitored and it has more of a dedicated team monitor watching it, which is interesting because I do think there's a lot of value in that. And maybe when we all work together, we had that before the first, I guess, riff, but um, it is a lot for a team trying to develop features that has to handle. And maybe this is like very more general, but like when you're building the feature and you're trying to, or I say feature, but it could be like a whole application, it could be a whole page. You're trying to make sure its metrics are well documented. You have maybe good error handling and logging. You know where errors are coming from. You're also making sure it's performant. There is like a lot of work to be done that's not always like in the same domain. And adding automated tests, again, the cost is like really high up front, but there is a maintain cost that like Dylan, you're calling out, and or a maintenance cost. And it's like a lot for a small team to own. Or so I've been like very appreciative, I guess, of the fact that we have a team that can help with this.
I think it's also very dependent on how like your test harness, and meaning like not exactly like Playwright or Cypress, but like more so like all the other things that go into how you structure your tests can like make or break like how effective they are, right? Like if your test harness is like set up in a way that it's like makes it difficult to create something like a flaky test, then it's like you're setting yourself up for success down the road of like your test's quality become better. And that's there's no like silver bullet of like, how do you do that? But like if we step back for a second, for example, and we talked about unit tests, it's like, okay, like one example might be like you prevent async operations from leaking between your unit tests, right? That's one way to prevent something that eventually leads to something like a flaky test, which one of our former coworkers did at Bleep Fair, with like sort of tracking promises and things like that between just tests. But I think it's especially like Scott, you're talking about sort of like the getting started problem of like how do you set up effective automated tests for something. I feel like you need to spend actually like a lot more time and effort on designing the test harness and like how you're going to approach testing versus the like, or at least in my experience, it's like you spend a lot of upfront time there and then you get to a point where it's like, okay, you can basically copy and paste an existing test and then tweak the test to whatever new thing you're testing, and it sort of works relatively fast. Or at least that's what I found in our experience. Like we have a pretty extensive suite of fixtures, and so those are basically end-to-end style tests for our CLI tool. We basically have like a set of some like code that the CLI tool will run against, and then folders showing like what's the result of running that tool against this code, and then you just like say, hey, I want to run this command, and then the test just does the assertions for you, and it says like, yep, as long as you're following this like schema of the expected sort of test structure in the file system, then you're off to the races and it works. But it's completely dependent on like how well is that harness set up in the first place.
Yeah, I'm glad you went down that path because this is something I wanted to talk about is like structure. So when we did Playwright together, Matt, or wherever we worked together, I feel like we would just use Playwright's methods and we would just like, we'd go to the page, we'd see if it does something, and then we might write a function of things we do that become like overlap or we do multiple times, right? Here I had to learn that we use what they call POMs or page object models. I'm not sure if you folks are familiar with them. I think we use them together when we worked together once, but I don't think we ever enforced them. But they're enforced here. So basically, it's like you create the pages, a class for the page, and you create all like the functions or methods on it that it does to try to help um, write that test. And for me, when I was first told to do that, I felt like it added a layer of indirection, and it does. But I guess the goal for it is to contain. I'm trying to keep an open mind about it. Like I'm not really a fan of it. I'll be completely honest. I feel like it adds a layer, but I have someone I'm working in parallel with building some tests. So we're basically creating our own POMs, and they're going to clash a lot. And it comes, you start making a lot of really abstract methods that do abstract things. And at some point, it feels like we're just rewriting Playwright um, for a specific page, and we can't have as much direct code. So while it has helped a little bit in once I got it set up, like again, this overhead cost of getting started, that I started to build some tests quicker. I think there's like a little bit of a cost because two people are working on it at once.
Just to like clarify for the listener, but then also myself, like would one example of this be like you have a class for your like login flow, for example, and
Sure.
that class has exposes some helper methods that allows you to like easily sort of, type in an email, type in a password, and then click the submit button and, verify that this like fake user logged in correctly or whatever, and then move you on to the next page. But that's like that might be an example of one of these classes. Is that right?
Correct. It's like at the page level, it could be at the modal level if you have like a modal takeover. Essentially, it's a helper that it does some of the functionality for you. So you can call that in your test, and you can write some of the code, but you write some of things that stay directly within the page or modal or area together. So yes, it's basically a helper to help try to contain actions that occur in specific regions. However, I feel like that's for me, I like the scrappier approach of we write the tests, we identify that we need to reuse these things. It's the speculative generality or you ain't gonna need it kind of mentality where like we write the thing we're trying to do, and then we um, find opportunities to share when it comes available instead of trying to write something that is like might be shared later, because you might spend all this time building this like page model to write one test and then never use it again, right? So um, I do think that there is, however, like the counterpoint is I do think it's like nice to have helper things or helper models to do this or functions to do this when you are writing a lot of tests and revisiting it. I just think it's my not so hot take is that this is something that should become out of like a cleanup or identified based on how many tests you're doing for a certain thing versus like simple tests, right? I got asked to do this for smoke tests, but like if I'm just gonna visit a page and see if it's not 400 or 500ing, like does it really need one layer in between that and what Playwright gives you to say go to the page and do the thing? I don't think so, but that's teach their own.
Yeah, I can imagine like how this probably came about in the sense of like I'm sure at some point someone said, okay, we're doing a number of these cleanup tasks after we merged in tests to maybe dedupe some logic between some tests, right? Like it's like okay, we've written the like 10 lines that it takes to log in like 50 times now, right? So it's like, all right, that seems like some duplication, and like that login is not going to change. Like we want a standardized way to log in, for example. And so like, let's abstract it. And then, you slowly start doing that more and more. And then you realize like, okay, like this has become enough of a trend that add it to our standards where we have this early abstraction. But then, yeah, maybe that early abstraction sort of loses its value because it's applied everywhere instead of applied to places where it's a classic it depends sort of case of like you can't codify the like it's like, well, sometimes you want to do that, sometimes you don't. It's like very hard to tell everyone across a distributed team about that.
I think that's right on the money. I should also clarify that like we do have fixtures, so like login because it happens. It can happen cross multiple like pages. It'll end up in a fixture versus like the POM, the page object model, are like things that happen specifically on a page or a modal. But you're right in the sense exactly what you're saying. But also a team owns it, right? So they probably wanted to come up with coding standards. So I'm speculating a little bit here, but they probably see this as an opportunity to be like, okay, these are the standards that we want to hold everyone to because it's like the ideal approach. However, it just like doesn't make the test look that much leaner, in my opinion. So I'm not a I'm often not a big fan of adding an extra layer unless it's something that's used twice. I guess is my my take there.
My first thought is, what the hell is a page object model, or POM? Because I apparently have never heard of this feature in Playwright. I was Googling it on the side. So if you could give me a quick intro
Yeah,
into what
yeah.
that
So
is.
page object model is just basically a reusable JavaScript class with a bunch of methods on it for the page or for a modal or for like some sort of part of a flow, right? And instead of like when you normally in Playwright, you'd be like, go to this page, um, find this button on the page, do this action. And in a page object model, what you'll do is you'll like define what the page is. So you have a method for that. You'll have some like private methods and some public methods. And the private methods might be like, okay, this is where the button is for the action on this page. This is where the search bar is. And you'll create like some private methods that can do that. And then you'll make some public methods that can be called in tests that might be reused multiple times. So then when you go over to the test, instead of having to do the upfront work of finding the button and whatnot, you're kind of masking it behind this page in the idea that it would be reused multiple times. But like it's funny that you say it the way you say because that's exactly how I felt when I first saw it, and I was like, "Oh, why do we need this? Because we can just like look on the page for the button." And so also the way we're doing tests, I should call out, is like they're just like one very elaborate tests with test steps. So I almost feel like it's anti this page object model in the sense that like I'm doing like single tests that are just really long tests when I feel like this would be excuse me, this would be more beneficial for if you're going to take an action multiple times, right? So see, like we get to this point where this page object model is like really just doing it's just wrapping like get by role, this specific button, pass in a parameter for this action. So this is where I call it a layer of indirection. Whereas like Playwright kind of does this for us. So unless there's like really like explicit multiple steps that you're gonna do multiple times, and I would normally just make a function or fixture to solve that problem. Um, this is why I said like, oh, just go the Playwright route as you're building. Usually when you build a test suite, you build more than like one single test. So you're like, oh, this is an action we're going to do multiple times. We'll turn it into a function or fixture that gets reused. But no, page object model is like you define the URL on how to get to the page. You can now use methods on this class that are like things we might test against multiple times. So basically, like a good example is I have a flow, like a multi-form flow that I test, and there's a next button on 3 pages. So it's like a private method, or sorry, it's a public method. There's a private method to get that specific button to query it, and then a public method to await it, that action. So basically, I call that in the Playwright test. So it just adds another layer. It is, I guess, a little bit nice in some examples, but my take is that like I think Matt basically said this, but it depends on when it's necessary. Like if it's things we're going to do a lot of times, okay, we should move it there. Versus like I don't currently. I think the rule here is just like we have every page has its own page object model, and I'm not sure if that's necessarily always um, necessary. Basically, like I was saying with smoke tests, they want page object models, but what's the point? We're just going to go to the page, we're going to visit it, and we're going to check if it's okay, basically, right? So, yeah.
I could see it being useful for like I could sort of craft a story in my mind in the sense of like, okay, you probably start with a smoke test and then down the line you start to add more test coverage to that, right? But yeah, it is like I think maybe Scott you said or Dylan said, like it is a little bit of a speculative generality of like you're maybe over applying a pattern that you spotted someplace and then you're sort of applying it everywhere, even though it might not always be beneficial.
What I'm hearing is you start to like create these reusable functions in Playwright to do common actions, and then you realize, I think it's kind of would start that way, and then you would realize, oh, these are all related to a very specific feature or a page. I'm going to group these into a POM or a page object model. That's kind of that's how I am hearing this and would try to apply it now at work.
That's how I would also apply it. However, the way we're doing it is it's like it's you start that way for every page. So I guess yeah, I have the same opinion. We're supposed to disagree, but we agree. Cool. I think we covered like that. And does anyone have any more thoughts on like effort? The next thing I want to get to is automated tests versus smoke test value and trade-offs if we have time as well.
What do you mean by effort? Like time it takes to write a good automated test?
Yeah, time it takes, the cost like is real. So basically, I know I'm explained at the beginning that I've been having like a lot of permissions issues and like upfront there's been a lot of cost, but I honestly find that like automated tests are like they're finicky in the sense that like Dylan said, they can be flaky. They take a lot of time. You have to really understand things. And is the value worth it? Like, I do think there's a lot of value, especially when it's related to money, um, related to like the how the company or the integrity of the main product or how the company's making money. Like, we should definitely have automated tests for those types of things. Or sorry, I keep saying automated, but like end to end. But is it always like the most important thing you do? Like right now, we're making a real big. So we launched our product this week, and uh, we've been making like a really big deal about having really good automated test coverage to uncover bugs and mostly end to end testing. And I guess I feel a little bit, I don't want to say pessimistic, but like I don't think that just because, yes, I do think that a lot of these tests can uncover bugs. We had a bug that I wrote a smoke test, and we uncovered that bug. It was like a Google authentication bug. So yes, I believe that we should have wrote smoke tests right away, did like a small minimum, and we would have been able to solve this problem. I think that like the high end automated full flow testing is important, but I don't think it would uncover the types of bugs that we had that our QA team was testing for, which is like small nitpicks of like, stylistically this isn't right, or we're getting cached values on time where we expect them to be updated. Like, I just don't think those are the types of things that you would, yeah, if you have all of the tools and time, yeah, we can automate that and make an end-to-end test and make sure all that stuff is good. But these are things I think high-end unit test coverage really, really gets for you, if these are things we're concerned about. And often I feel like something like that example of like, oh, the timing's cached and it's a little different. That's something like you got to discover that you care about, or it needs to be called out immediately, or we're not going to just like write a test to be like, oh, the timing is perfect one-to-one. And I think these are symptoms of the fact that we're mimicking an existing system and we're not building it exactly the same, right? Like I had called out like, oh, we're supposed to be doing like real-time updating or polling to make sure that the app is updating. And like we talked about it and they said like, yeah, we'll do it. It's really very easy. Like it could be really easy for us, but it's just like we didn't do it. And then we're getting all these comments about bugs about real-time updating. So basically what I'm trying to get at here is like, what is the value of automated tests? Like, when do we define that they're worth the time and complexity to put them in? And where do you see the best opportunities to do that?
Yeah, I think I don't know necessarily if I can speak to like the time and effort, but just like to maybe to like sprinkle in a little story from past experience when we were at Fireworks. The the like automated testing was kind of a pain, primarily because our login flow was pretty clunky. It was like difficult to impossible to set up a test user that we can log in as during our Playwright tests. And so this made it like really difficult for us to like add test coverage for, anything beyond unit test coverage for experiences that we're releasing. Um, and like I spent like maybe a month or two like trying to like clean up our auth flow to like make that more feasible or more possible. Um, but I think it's like maybe the like sort of the grounding point here is like the or maybe two grounding points here is like, one is there's going to be a difference between, like, there's going to be some drift between the spec and the implementation, right? Like, I don't know if you have a PM or not, but like if you sit down and like they outline a user story and then like you create some tasks and like say, okay, like all these features should be supported. And then once 3 weeks later, you get back and you say, okay, we've delivered the product, but along those 3 weeks, we had to make trade-offs, right? Like we couldn't support, or we didn't have time and capacity to support real-time updating in the dashboard. You just have to click a refresh button, for example. It's like, so like that's a drift between maybe your original spec and if you have manual QA or some process that follows that spec versus follows the implementation, then you're going to see like those are going to be flagged. But then I think also there's a variety of like other decisions you make while you're doing the implementation that greatly impact like how easy is it to test and verify that change. Certain things are sort of maybe two-way doors in the sense of like, it's like, okay, you can implement it one way and then realize that's not that easy to test and verify. And so you go back and you can implement it in a different way, but still get the same end result, but it's easier to test. But other times it's like you're 5 technical decisions down the line and you realize like, well, we would have to rewind those 5 steps in order to like get to a state where it's easier for us to like verify that this thing works as expected in an automated testing environment. And that's maybe hard to sell. Like certainly like if you're just an engineer on a team and not necessarily have like the ability to speak up and say, wait, we need to like step back a bit and think about our testing strategy before we jumped in implementation. Like that's hard to get team buy-in, get leadership buy-in to say like, we need to like rethink how we approach this. So I don't know, that's maybe tangentially related to what you were talking about there, Scott, but I think those things start to, like, it makes it very difficult to think about or like to implement tests in a way that's like efficient, but then also like valuable for your use cases without needing to spend a ton of time. And I feel like sometimes, I don't know, maybe a majority of the time in engineering, we find that we like the thing that we're testing is not that easy to test. And so we spend maybe most of that time trying to make it so it's easy to test.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's basically been my my problem with like the permissions. Like, so basically our application does things and talks to 2 different applications, things that just like no one else has done. And Dylan talked about fixtures, and you're kind of almost getting at like fixtures, or like we're identifying that like right now I have like a minute of overhead to go to one application and do this action, and then to come back to my application to be able to do an action. And one of my teammates called out like, oh, can we just like edit the GraphQL query? So I was like, yeah, can we edit the GraphQL query? So now we're jumping through, we're actually like bypassing the way it actually works just to write the test. But okay, like we're gonna try to make it easier to write the test. And I'm asking like who does that, and like everyone agrees we should do it, and I'm like, should I do it? Like, so there's like a little bit of back and forth there, like ownership problems. I'm like, it's like who owns it? So it's I don't know. It's been very interesting because you're basically you're finding workarounds essentially to make sure a thing functions the way you want, and it starts to, I don't know, it starts to get a little bit deviated from the original point, right?
Yeah, I think maybe that's like an important. I would categorize that as like a red flag in terms of like you shouldn't. I feel like you shouldn't be building in pathways in your implementation that are only for automated testing. I
Yeah, and I
understand
agree
that
with
it
that.
happens in progress, right? Or happens in practice, but yeah, I feel like at that point, like you're going to end up diverging the actual like what the user goes down versus like what the test goes down in terms of like the path it follows in your service, and then you're gonna find a sev down the line, and it's like, why didn't our test catch us? Well, it's like the tests were testing a different path entirely, and we thought it was the same when it started, but anyway. So yeah, I'll stop ranting.
I mean, I couldn't agree with that more. It's funny because like that's exactly how I felt. Like I was like, no, I'm just keep. So I kept having permissions errors when I was writing this test, but I was like, I'm gonna keep going down this path because in theory, like this is how it actually is done, and we just need like maybe like a fixture or something that does this faster. But yeah. So like, let's just talk quickly about end-to-end testing versus smoke testing, value and trade-offs, because when I first started working on this, I think again, like Matt and I like, at Fireworks, like we immediately were like, let's just get some smoke tests running because like that's gonna be a high value impact. So what's been interesting is I've had some friction. So our end-to-end testing suite is set up like very elaborately, and the only smoke test that existed was like login for another team. And I was like, well, we should actually. I've had a lot of friction with folks because I'm like, no, we should just like make sure every page isn't blown up. So I wrote 200s tests essentially for every page, and like invalid pages, like where you wouldn't expect to go, because we want to like identify the correct paths. And I've had people like, I think this is interesting because I don't know if one theory is necessarily correct, but my take is we should have smoke tests that allow us to run at a low cost and make sure that like if we can move faster, and if it fails, we fail like hard and we know, and we never push out based off of those. But I've had folks say to me like, "Well, oh, the end-to-end test will catch this if if it's a problem." And we don't. Again, we have a CI pipeline that runs tests, Playwright tests, but it runs off of staging. I was like, "Well, so you won't actually know if your PR fails." So I was like, "We should have either we have preview deploys and we have dev environments. We should have a pipeline that runs the smoke test against the change that confirms it before we get there. Like it just seems like a natural progression." And I think because I want to make like a fundamental change to how the flow works, the automated testing like PM was like super into. He's like, yeah, you're right. We should have this. But I've got a lot of friction and pushback because people are like just focus on the end-to-end tests. And like, yeah, we need the end-to-end tests, but like we should have this fundamental foundation to catch things ahead of time. Because we push things into master and then it sits there, and then I told you earlier that like we'll run the test and say, oh, is anything broken? Do we have to now go and find it and pull it back? It shouldn't get there. Like sure, things are going to get by us, but my take is like we shouldn't be pushing into so quick to push into something, then an on-call person is reading about, okay, what might have been the problem that needs to get reverted, and then they're reverting it later, and it stops a day's deploy, right? So I just think that's fundamentally not um, an ideal approach here. So my point, going back to the point of end-to-end tests versus smoke tests, I think in any environment, my take is that smoke tests should come first, and they should be gating code ahead of time the best they can. And then the end-to-end automated tests that may run against entire flows, ideally, they would run if you touch the files related to it locally, but at least like those can come secondarily. And I guess the pushback is I had been getting is like, oh, the automated tests are going to fail if so we don't need the smoke tests. I was like, no, we should have the smoke tests. We should make sure we don't have big functionality breakage.
One thing I wrote down when you said that was, and maybe this is just a bad take, is an end-to-end test or a smoke test just an end-to-end test? Like, what's the difference? I guess.
Yeah, they are just end-to-end tests. They're just really loose, high-level, fast-running end-to-end tests that just basically make sure your page is rendering. So you didn't go down some sort of crazy path and accidentally something's blowing up. Like ideally, someone actually visits the link and catches a 400 or 500, but you know, things happen. And to me, it's a quick check that makes sure that everything's running as expected. It allows the developer to move faster.
Yeah, to me, it's like, and I'm not really arguing with you at all. It's every end-to-end test is a smoke test, but it sounds like to you, a smoke test is more of just like a very light check.
Yeah, and I agree with that. Like every end-to-end test kind of is a smoke test, but there's a bigger cost to running larger end-to-end tests against pipelines. Whereas if you run just like your smoke tests, you can have a quick sanity to make sure everything's good at a high level. And currently, we don't run anything against your PR because we're running it against staging. So like if we could just run a high level check
Yeah,
against your
I'll,
work.
I'll note that like the more complicated or complex your end-to-end test is, I think the more like likely it will be flaky. Like the amount of things you do could like lead to additional flakiness. So if you can like simplify it to a very specific flow, and then maybe make an additional new one to test something else. What I've seen is people will be like, here's my end-to-end test for the app. It's one test, and it's like it takes 8 minutes to run. It's just there's so many chances for it to fail, and you fix it, and then it fails again in a different place, and then it times out because of some like service that it depends on. And we didn't even get into that, like whether or not your end-to-end tests actually hit real services or not, um, which is a fun topic. But yeah,
Yeah.
I think the way that you create your end-to-end tests is really important, like the scope of them. Because if the scope is too large, it can become quite an issue, in my opinion.
And then parallelizing them so they run in parallel, I would assume.
But yeah, I think they're both good. It's just you have to it's a balancing act of like, am I getting value out of them versus are they breaking so often that I'm not getting value out of them? And that comes back to like, do we have the right tooling to prevent flaky tests?
Your point is a good one though, because like it could take hours to run smoke tests. Sorry, end-to-end tests, right? And that just goes to my point about the smoke test is like a quick signal that gives you confidence.
All right, Dylan, what's your hot take on automated testing or end-to-end testing?
My quick hot take is I think they're super valuable. They help you sleep at night. It's like having somebody click through your site while you sleep. Makes you like, it gives you an ability to like sort of forget about work. If something goes wrong in your end test, it should go off. But I do think they're a huge pain to get right. And that typically what I see when you're working on a project is they get sort of left to the very end of the project. And sometimes you decide, oh, we have to launch tomorrow. We don't have time to get those end tests running. We'll get those as a fast follow. So that it's like they kind of, I mean, that's just a problem with the way that I'm building things. But it's kind of hard to build an end-to-end test until you have your end state also. And that can change quite frequently towards the end of a project. So I think you need them. I think they're a pain in the ass.
Scott, what's your quick 30-second hot take? Okay.
Yeah, I think they're valuable. I think you need to think through more is not better here. Less is probably better. So this is like thinking through like what is actually truly vital to the usage of your app as opposed to let's just test everything, test all the things. They definitely can be flaky, and I would honestly think that it'd be great if they're co-located because you'd be more likely to update or remember about them, to update them. I think at a high level, smoke tests are best so you can move quickly and have high level coverage. Chances are, if you make a mistake, a smoke test will catch most of your high level mistakes, and then end-to-end tests should just cover the most critical flows, checking out, logging in, being able to make purchases, clicking the final submit button in a form.
Okay. My hot take is you probably don't need end-to-end tests as early as you think you might need them. And
Love
instead
it.
you could backfill the what you get out of end-to-end tests with good metrics and users. That's not to say you
Love
should
it.
never write them, but I think too many people maybe worry about like, oh, we don't have these yet. It's like you probably don't need to worry about them yet. Yeah. All right. Stand-up updates. Scott, what's up with you?
I don't know. I basically talked about myself this whole time. I've been working on end-to-end tests.
You said you released a new feature. You launched a new feature.
We launched our application at work. It went well. I got like asked to do stuff like immediately. I made some changes to permissioning, and now I own them on the back end. I just own them. I made one change to the shape, and I own it for life as things go. So yeah, it went well. Launch was good. Basically, we're going to be moving on to our phase 2. We're going to be making our metrics more sound and our monitoring dashboards better. But we've pushed that down the pipe because we were working mostly on improving the automated tests first.
Cool. Dylan, what's up with you?
I'm in the middle of trying to migrate an app from Cloudflare pages to Cloudflare workers, which is not like my main task, so it's just kind of annoying. I think I know everything I need to do it, but I have to like halt everyone's development for a day, which is annoying. So that sort of task is always super annoying to do. And then I just presented a tech plan for an hour last week on a bespoke e-commerce experience. Landing page, listing page, product page, checkout, cart, everything. Probably didn't have enough like technical detail, but it was pretty high level. So following up on some comments there, and then hopefully can get started on it because it's going to take a long ass time to finish.
Sounds like you're building a competitive warfare.
Not quite. The problem is we don't have a great design system, so I feel like the designers tend to like create these very bespoke experiences, and rather than like reusing or trying to reuse components. So a lot of my estimates came down to like this is a net new component, like or sorry, there's 24 net new components, and it's going to take a day each. So this project's going to yeah, it's like my initial estimate was like 75 days, and they were like, this has to be shipped in 2 months. I don't know how we're going to do that.
I was gonna say that sounds like a Claude estimate. It's like, well, this test sounds meaty. Let's
No,
give it
no,
2 weeks.
no. It was like there was just like 80 tasks or whatever already, and
Sounds
I
like
just
80
had
plus agents running in parallel, and you can do it in a day.
exactly. So that's been fun to like figure out, and now I need to get it approved so I can start on it. But yeah, it's been just figuring out ways to like reduce scope there. And then tomorrow I'm running a 5 mile race in Boston at the Harpoon Brewery. Actually trying to do something like hit a goal, so we'll see how that goes. Sub 40 minutes. We'll see.
Cool. Yeah, we're kind of like our team at work is like sort of in this like what we call a code red. Basically, we need to ship some stuff and deliver some important value improvement. Otherwise, things are looking pretty bleak. So we've been shipping a lot of stuff, but there's sort of like some concerns on like are we like shipping the right things, or like are we working with our customers, which are other developers, like enough to better understand what their pain points are and like how we are helping them. It's like we think we have a pretty strong conviction on what we're building, and then it's important, but there's some blank spots that we need to go in and fill. And part of that, like today and like yesterday evening and today, I sort of like spec'd out a way for humans and agents to provide feedback to us via the CLI, which is pretty neat. So that's like going to be hopefully kind of interesting to see if we can add like some like post hook use or something to everyone's Claude sessions to like have Claude go back in the transcript and like report some of its feedback about the tooling that it used, and so we can like improve it over time also. But yeah. Cool. All right. Thanks everyone for tuning in this week. Remember to leave a review for the episode and the show on your favorite podcast network. We appreciate 6 passing tests out of 4 the most. Remember, if the app doesn't let you do that, then it's a bug on their end and not on ours. Feel free to join the Bike Shed community Discord server to connect with folks in the tech ecosystem, share your thoughts with us and listeners, talk about automated testing, end-to-end testing, like what your strategies are there. That we'd be really interested to hear more over there. You can find a link to the server as well as all of our episodes, transcripts, episode summaries at bikeshedpod.com. That's bikeshedpod.com, all one word. If you enjoyed this episode or other episodes, please share it with your friends or enemies. We need more listeners. Otherwise, see you guys maybe next week. Peace out.